Hello and welcome to this episode of BariAftercare, the podcast, the title of which is, How Did I Get Here? Understanding Your Obesity. This is a topic that I have covered before and a topic that you probably know quite a bit about. However, I wanted to cover this again at this point in time because I like to keep myself up on the facts. I like to know what has changed because it's important to me that you can count on me to give you reliable information and not stuff that is just my own belief system. I give you plenty of that for sure, and I'm sure I will today as well. But I wanted to kind of go over what the current state of obesity is and what factors are now seen as contributing to the disease of obesity that may have climbed up on the ranks or have decreased in the ranks. So let's go over this information. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you some of the statistics, which are kind of boring but important, and talk about how that has changed over the years. And one significant factor is really standing out above a lot of the others when it comes to the increase in the rates of obesity, not just in the United States, but globally as well. And it may not surprise you that that is the food sourcing. And we will talk quite a bit about that. So today's talk is not at all about who's to blame for obesity. Is it your fault? Is it the government's fault? Is it the food producer's fault? There's so many factors that go into this obesity epidemic. But what I do want to focus heavily on are our individual responsibilities for our lives. Obviously, and we're going to talk about this in just a minute, there are quite a few genetic factors that go into whether or not a person is predisposed to having the disease of obesity. But even that is something that you can make choices about in your personal life to mitigate. In other words, you may have more of a propensity than your next door neighbor to easily gain weight. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to live your adult life as an obese person. And even if you do, there are things that you can do to maybe restrict how much impact the disease has in your life. So we're going to focus on what the facts are and the facts related not only to the disease of obesity itself, but the facts of what we can do in our lives, given whatever predispositions that we have, to make our lives as good as possible. Because there are many diseases like the disease of obesity that a person can be biologically predisposed to. So let's get on with it. All right, so not about judging again, but for sure, as I go through this information, we're going to do reality checks throughout this as we talk about the different contributing factors to the disease of obesity. And I want you to take a really good inventory of your own life and the effort that you put into doing what is best for you, given your body type, given your genetic predisposition to a really difficult and chronic disease. All right, so highlights. What we're going to do is review the terms, blah, blah, the boring but critical statistics. And then we're going to talk about the good news, which I believe is that we as a society and you as an individual can make changes in this. And I'm going to talk about examples in our recent history of problems that our country has dealt with in terms of disease that have become either eradicated or greatly improved on. So that's good news. And I think that, and I hope that the disease of obesity will kind of follow this trajectory that we've seen with other diseases. And then, of course, we're going to do a review of the causes of obesity, and more importantly, and most importantly, the most important part of this entire podcast is for you to do a personal inventory / reality check Are you doing what you can do to mitigate the impact of a chronic disease in your life so it doesn't have to be as bad as it could be, given what you choose to do with your life? So I want to start, and the information that I used to gather this information are the big guns, right? It's the big sources: the World Health Organization, Centers for Disease Control, American Heart Association, the people who have the money to do the research and report this information. So we get confused about what's the difference between overweight and obesity? Well, overweight is a condition of excessive fat, right? Excessive fat deposits in the body. Obesity is separated from that as more impactful in a harmful way because it's a complex chronic disease, meaning it's not going to go away. You have to manage it. Just like if you have the disease of addiction, or if you have the disease of cancer, or if you have a chronic disease of blood pressure, hypertension, or the chronic disease of heart conditions, you have to do what you can to manage that disease so that it doesn't manifest in its fullest, most harmful forms. All right, so obesity is a complex, very complex, a lot of factors, defined by excessive fat deposits that can impair health. So overweight is the fat deposits, excessive fat deposits. But when we cross into obesity, it becomes a chronic disease that can really affect your health. I don't need to tell you about how obesity affects people's health. You know, I'm not going to even go over all of those things. But you've seen it, maybe you've experienced it, maybe if you've lost a significant amount of weight, you've seen improvements in the comorbidities associated with obesity, like heart disease and diabetes and blood pressure, bone health, a lot of different cancers. So obesity, the disease of obesity, as you probably have experienced in your own life or could see it in your future until you decided to intervene, affects a person's quality of life. It affects a person's ability to sleep, to move, to travel, to engage in things maybe they once enjoyed earlier in life, to participate with the people they love in doing whatever kinds of activities they love doing. So we want to decrease the effects of this disease in your life, and there are many, many ways you can do that. And in the BariAftercare program, Laura Preston, who is a huge part of this program, said in the course of a conversation recently that something about living the life you dream. And it just really hit me. It just stuck in my head. And I said, Laura, that phrase, live the life you dream, is such a beautiful and powerful image to me. And so I want you all to imagine, to visualize the life that you dream and realize that you can move closer to that dream through your efforts in many areas of your life. And so live the life that you dream is sort of the overarching premise of the entire BariAftercare program, because we do go beyond bariatrics. While we do focus on nutrition and health and movement and dealing with stress, because that can affect emotional eating, all of those things, we focus on those, but we are about being your best self in terms of your relationship with yourself, in your relationships with other people, in your work, in your parenting, in your partnering. We want you to be the best version of yourself in all of those areas so that you can live the life that you dream. At least get closer to it through your own efforts. And in the upcoming year, 2025, our word of the year is effort, because the things that we have interest in, passion in, are evidenced by our amount of effort. So if you say you're interested in having a healthier marriage, then the evidence would show you engaged in learning about healthy communication, maybe participating in marriage classes or partnering groups or learning to set boundaries. So your interest in something is evidenced through your effort. So if you have this life you imagine, this life you dream of, we are here, we as in the people that are part of BariAftercare, to help you. Each member in this group is here to encourage you and to share with you what works for them and ask for help from you to what works for you to get closer to living that life you dream. The disease of obesity moves you further from being able to live that life. So obesity affects your health. It affects every single area of your life. And I want you to know that obesity, a disease, a chronic disease in a family, whatever that chronic disease is, to some degree, it absolutely affects every person in that family. So if you're the person with the disease, you want to do everything you can. You want to put a great deal of effort into managing that disease so it doesn't have negative ramifications on any individual or the family as a whole. Now, this was an interesting thing, and I put this right here up front because I have some agreement and disagreement with this statement. The World Health Organization put this out, and they said that the dietary and physical activity patterns, so eating and exercise, for individual people are largely the result of environmental and societal conditions that greatly constrain personal choice. So what this is saying that our society and our environments make it difficult for people to make healthy eating and movement choices. Yes and no is what I say, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. They further say that obesity is a societal rather than an individual responsibility. I absolutely disagree with this. With the solutions to be found through the creation of supportive environments and communities that embed healthy diets and regular physical activity as the most accessible, available, and affordable behaviors of daily life. I agree with that. I agree that it is both a societal and an individual problem. I agree that our society panders to or makes so readily available unhealthy food. There's a lot of expensive health clubs. There are a lot of expensive exercise boot camps and different kinds of things. And while society has a role in correcting the trajectory of where we are going in terms of our health collectively. And so I want you to understand, I absolutely believe that. And the food industry, I believe that that has a huge impact as well. We as individuals have the ultimate responsibility. So when they say obesity is a societal rather than an individual responsibility, I cringe, because what this does is say, oh, well, I can't help it, there's nothing I can do. At least that's what I hear. I don't want you to hear that. And my issue with that is most of us who are struggling with something, whether it's obesity or addiction or whatever it is, we want to say, it's not my fault, I can't do anything about it. Oh, woe is me. No, that is absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. We as individuals are 100% responsible for what we do with our bodies. Now, I will come back with a little bit of caveat. I will agree that in areas of extreme poverty in our world, that's not always the case. If you have food available, you're going to eat it, and I get that. And if it's unhealthy food, it's much better food than no food. So that is not what I'm referring to. And I do agree that society has a huge role in this, without a doubt. But for the people I'm talking to on this podcast, I don't think that applies to you. I think for the people listening to this podcast, each of us is in an environment where we can choose to find healthy food. And we'll talk about that cost thing in just a minute, because I can hear somebody going, yeah, well, it costs so much more to eat healthy. I'm going to give you some statistics on that. In fact, I was so interested in this when I was doing this podcast yesterday when I was preparing for this, that I'm going to do an entire podcast on that topic, because what I'm finding out through research and evidence is that it's really not that much less expensive or more expensive to eat healthy, not that much less expensive to eat poorly. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to understand that if you have the means and if you've had the education, which pretty much all of you listening to this podcast have, because if you went through any kind of weight loss program in the past, or if you've opted to have a surgical procedure for your obesity in the present, you have been educated. You have seen a dietitian. And if your program did not require that, shame on them. And it is your responsibility then to go find somebody who is well-versed in bariatric nutrition. And when I say bariatric nutrition, I don't mean weight loss surgery. Bariatric is a term for the field of science that deals with the disease of obesity. So it could be your primary care doctor, it could be an obesity specialist, it could be, but find a dietitian who is very well trained in the disease of obesity and in bariatric nutrition. That is your responsibility. So again, one of my biggest pet peeves is people who throw their hands up and go, well, what am I supposed to do? I just never had any education. Go get it. You have the World Wide Web. Find really good education. My good friend Susan Mitchell, who is somebody I would absolutely refer you to, is a bariatric registered dietitian, and there are many great registered bariatric dietitians. Go to one of them, go to their websites, listen to their podcasts, listen to their information, because they will educate you. They're not going to show up at your door. You got to go find their information. Laura and I talk all the time about Mel Robbins' podcast episode called Nobody's Coming. If you go onto YouTube and you look up Mel Robbins and you look up Nobody's Coming, you'll find her video that says, nobody's coming. Nobody's coming to do your laundry. Nobody's coming to do your dishes. Nobody's coming to get you out of the house to eat or to exercise. Nobody's going to come and fill your fridge with healthy foods. Nobody's coming to teach you what you need to know. It is your responsibility. We have individual responsibility. So it irks me to no end when anybody says, this is not your responsibility. It is. It is your life. It is your responsibility. So that's my little soapbox on that. I do agree that there are huge societal problems that need to be overcome, and we all, as individuals, need to work collectively to heal societal ills as well. All right, but I do want to say something about the people who are screaming in their heads, it costs more to eat healthy. There's some research from Harvard School of Public Health. So again, not a rinky-dinky little institution. We're talking Harvard, good reputation, good research. Eating a healthy diet generally costs around $1.50 more per day compared to an unhealthy diet. Did you hear that? $1.50 more per day to eat healthy. It's worth it to live an additional 30 years. It's worth it to not have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on medications for high blood pressure and heart disease and have hospital stays and surgeries. $1.50 per day? Come on, Starbucks drinkers. You can handle that. All right, so $1.50 more per day compared to an unhealthy diet when standardized to 2,000 calories per day, meaning that healthy food is typically slightly more expensive per calorie than less healthy options. So don't be screaming that. I can't afford to eat healthy. I started to go into that, the $10 meals at the fast food restaurants, but I'm going to save that for the other podcast. All right, so some stats. These may mean nothing to you, but I want you to listen because it's important. In 2022, these are recent figures put out by the big guns, right? 1 in 8 people were living with obesity. That's a lot. And it's so many more than 20 years ago. You heard Sanjay Gupta say that the percentage of people who are obese in this country is so much greater than it was just 20 years ago, and that cannot be a result of genetics. That's important. So for the people who like to hang their hats on, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm genetically predisposed. Well, probably your ancestors 20 years ago were predisposed as well. Genes don't change that much in 20 years, per Sanjay Gupta, per science, per a lot of things you can look up on your own on that World Wide Web. But our number of obese people in our world has increased tremendously. Part of that is because of society. Part of that is because of the food industry. But the bottom line, for the majority of people listening to this podcast anyway, is that you do have access to healthy food. There are a lot of people who don't, and I understand that. And that is a different topic, and there are many bigger problems associated with that. But you and I, for the most part, we do have access to healthier options. And this is where the whole business of individual responsibility comes in. So, yeah, you may be genetically predisposed. That is not a blanket excuse for those of us living where you and I live, because we do have choices. Here's the stats. Worldwide, adult obesity has more than doubled since 1990. That's 35 years ago. And adolescent obesity has quadrupled. And yes, fast food is very much part of that equation. When I was a kid, if we went to fast food, it was once or twice a month, not 3 times a day. I talk to people who literally eat out 3 times a day for every meal. There's no way not to be obese. Well, I suppose there is. But it greatly increases your odds of being obese if you're going to eat out at fast food 3 times a day. That's personal responsibility, my friends. All right, so I'm not going to go on and on and on over all these statistics, but there are a lot of them. So if you're interested, you can find those on the World Health website. But what is important is that the number of people in our country who are struggling with the disease of obesity, which does make life a struggle, has doubled in 35 years. Genetics haven't changed that much. And adolescents, my God, it's quadrupled. Our kids are not eating well. As parents, we are responsible, at least when they're young, not necessarily by the time they're teens or if they're driving on their own. But if you're a parent and you're feeding your kids fast food 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, that, my friends, is your responsibility. And we need to take ownership of that. We are responsible for our children in many areas of life. All right, now we're going to talk about the hopeful part here, because I thought, and this was before I looked up the statistics on this, but I was thinking, did you ever watch that show with Don Draper? Oh gosh, I can never remember the name of it. Anyway, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. It was set in the 60s, and in the show, I remember this one scene in particular. Well, first of all, people were smoking everywhere back in the 60s. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and both of my parents smoked in our house all the time. They smoked in the car all the time. I lived in a cold climate, meaning the doors and windows were not open for like 9 months out of the year. I absolutely have lung issues today. Part of it growing up, and I did smoke myself, personal responsibility, for probably, 8 years or so when I was in college. And here's my surface response. That's what you did. That's what everybody did. So if you're saying that's what everybody does, they go out for fast food. The truth is I had a choice. I could smoke or not smoke. Yes, that's what everybody did. Yes, I learned that growing up. And that does have a huge impact, which we'll get to in just a minute. The environment in which you are raised has a huge impact on how you eat, for sure. But today, as an adult, you have the option to make changes. That's that effort that I'm talking about. The effort to get what you say you want, to live the life that you dream. It's not just going to come to you. You got to go and get it. But I was thinking about this business of smoking. So in this show, everybody smoked. All the people smoked. And at the office, on the airplane, in the bathroom, all the places, people smoked. And in one particular scene, the family went for a picnic. And they had paper cups and paper plates, and they had this nice little, sheet spread out. And when they got finished, they stood up and they shook off their sheet and left all the trash. The sandwich wrappers, the cups, everything. Just shook it off and left. That was a huge problem, right? That makes me cringe to see that and to think about that. Both parts of this in that movie, the smoking everywhere and the littering. Those are two problems in our society that have become so much less of a problem. Smoking is not allowed in a lot of places. Yes, people still smoke. It is an individual choice. It is 100%. There is nobody who smokes that isn't responsible for their choice to smoke. End of story. End of story. So if you choose to smoke, that is a personal responsibility. And along with that, you accept the consequences that are posted all over cigarette packages now that were not posted on cigarette packages in the day. When we were over in Europe last summer, I remember seeing, there's a lot more smoking over there than there is here. And the cigarette packages literally have labels on them that say, cigarettes will kill you. I would like to say, fast food 3 times a day will kill you, even though it's not listed on the package. And you know this. You know this. So is it the environment's fault that a person smokes? No. Is it the environment's fault that you choose to go to fast food? No, not at all. It is an individual responsibility. And when we make those choices, we are accepting the consequences that go along with those. Now, people don't like to hear that, right? We don't like to hear that. We want to buck up and we want to get defensive and we want to argue. But let me put it this way. Let's say you have a teenager and your teenager has a driver's license and you say to that teenager, here's the deal. You can take the car, and if the car is home and the keys are hung up by 11:30 p.m., then you will continue to have access to the car when it works out. Now, if the teenager comes home at 12:30, 1 o'clock, a good and healthy parent will take those keys and say, sorry, there's a consequence. You're not getting the car for the next 2 weeks or whatever it is. And the teenager has a fit. You're the worst parent in the world, and how can you do this to me? And you blah, blah, blame the parent, blame the parent, blame the parent. Guess what? The teenager knew ahead of time, because you're a good parent, what the consequences would be if they didn't bring that car home. And so when the kid doesn't bring the car home and they blame you, you can fully and rightfully say, you knew the consequences before you took the car. You knew the consequences when you chose individual responsibility to bring that car home late. It's not your car. You're not driving it. So the child, the teenager, made the choice for the consequence. Now, when you put it like that, it's like, oh, yeah, for sure. It's not my fault. The kid brought the car home. Same exact thing. If you choose to put unhealthy food into your mouth more often than you eat healthy food, you are choosing the consequences that go with it. Ouch. I know. I was choosing the consequences of lung damage every time I smoked a cigarette. At the time, I didn't care. At the time, you think you don't have time to make healthy food. You think it costs much money. You think it's easier to run through. And it is. But you're choosing the consequences too. If you make a choice, a personal responsibility choice to put forth effort to doing things differently, you'll get different results. If the kid starts bringing the car home on time, the kid gets more opportunity to take the car. But the good news is these things can happen individually and societal-wise. I chose to quit smoking many, many, many years ago, 30 some years ago. Positive health consequences as a result, for sure. So the choices we make have an impact not only on us and our future, but future generations, because children learn what they're living. So it does have an impact. It's not your responsibility if your child grows up to do unhealthy things. That will fall on their shoulders. But you are responsible for the choices that you make. So those are two examples. We don't litter like we used to, hopefully. Well, we don't. And there has been a decrease in smoking. Not only that, then I started looking it up. And so what I found through research is 10 great public health achievements in the United States between 1900 and 1999. Check this out. Because we've worked on improving our health collectively, and because we have worked societally to get more medical care, guess what? The average lifespan of a person in the United States has lengthened by more than 30 years. 30 years! That's a long time. That's a lot of time to hug grandkids and go on vacation and, celebrate holidays and love with each other. Spend time, make memories, share your wisdom with those next generations. That's a long time, 30 years. And 25 years of this gain are attributable to advances in public health. That's a beautiful thing. That is a societal thing and an individual choice thing, because society can provide the health care, but you as an individual have to seek it out and take advantage of it. So here are some other ones. The diseases of smallpox the disease of smallpox has been eliminated because of vaccines. People don't get or die of smallpox anymore. There's been an elimination of, I don't know what this disease is. Oh, polio. They just have the long word poliomyelitis. So elimination of polio. My therapist that I had, who was 15, 20 years older than I am, had polio as a child. People in my generation very rarely experienced polio. People, my children and grandchildren's generation, are like, what is polio? Right? They don't even know it. There's been huge control of measles, rubella, tetanus, diphtheria, something I can't pronounce, and other infectious diseases in the United States and other parts of the world. So there have been vast health improvements. Part of it is because of advances in healthcare, and a lot of it because of personal choices. Motor vehicle safety has improved tremendously. Again, we have personal responsibility there too, right? Don't drink and drive. That's improved over the years. We have safer workplaces. There's a decline in deaths from coronary heart disease and stroke. That is amazing. And interestingly, there are safer and healthier foods. Hello. There are safer and healthier foods. Are you choosing those? There's, recognition of tobacco as a health hazard. So it's possible. I believe that the tides will turn and people will start saying, all of this sugar, all of this unhealthy fat, all of these fried foods, all of these high carb concoctions with all these ingredients, we don't even know what they are. There's going to be some societal change in that. But between now and then, are you going to take personal responsibility? Because there's a societal component and there's a personal accountability component. With BariAftercare, we offer tools to help you learn to make those decisions, to put your health and the health of your family at the top of your priority list. All right, so let's go over some of these factors that result in the disease of obesity. And they include health behaviors, clearly what you do, stress, health conditions, medications, genes, and environment. So let's go over these a little bit. We're not going to get too in depth about this because that is really not the point. But I do want to emphasize so that you are aware of the facts. So genetics are absolutely related to the predisposition, not the inevitability, can't even think of the word now, predetermination, is that the word? Anyway, you can be predisposed, that's the word, to carry more weight, absolutely. Now, there are rare, what they're calling single gene disorders that can directly cause obesity. Did you hear me say very, very, very rare? So if a person has something called Bardet-Biedl syndrome or Prader-Willi syndrome, those diseases are genetic and directly related to obesity. It's more common for multiple genes to be responsible for a person feeling hungry, for a sense of fullness or a lack thereof, and for metabolism. So these are genetic factors, right? You may have a genetically slow metabolism. You may not feel fullness like other people do. You may feel hungry more often, and those are genetic conditions. And a lot of people who are taking the GLP-1s have stated, I don't feel hungry all the time. Now I know what it feels like to be full. I don't crave these unhealthy things because I'm hungry all the time. So those are realities, but they are not absolutes. It doesn't mean you will absolutely have the disease of obesity because you have some of these genetic predispositions. The most common forms of human obesity arise, listen to this, it's very important, from the interaction of multiple genes, environmental factors, and behavior. And this complex etiology, all of these things put together, make the search for obesity genes really challenging because if somebody has really bad eating habits and they don't exercise, how are we to know what's most likely responsible for this? So we do know that genetics does contribute. Here's the wording that they use. This is not me, this is research. In the British Medical Bulletin, if you want specifics, and I will post all of these links on the show notes so that you know I found this information from reputable research. Consistent evidence shows that genetics contributes significantly to the weight gain susceptibility. So genetically, you may be very much more predisposed. It doesn't mean that this has to take full expression. If you work on the other factors like environment, like personal health behaviors that also contribute to the disease of obesity. So yes, you cannot alter your genetics. If you are predisposed, you are predisposed. But if I hear somebody say, well, I was doomed, it was my genetics, I say no, absolutely not true. You need to have a reality check and look at the other components that you can influence. The parts of this, how did you get here? Partly genetic, partly other things. So yes, how you got here is partly related to genetics. Given, understood, acknowledged, agreed upon part of it. So let's look at, because does it make any sense to say, oh wow, it's society's fault, it's the food maker's fault, and it's my genetics. There's nothing I can do. Not true. Not true. Those are all realities. And we don't have a lot of influence over food makers at this point in time, individually. We don't have any influence over our genetic predispositions at this point in time. We have tremendous influence over our environment and our health behaviors, which are also right in there with the complexity in terms of causes of how did I get here? So let's talk about we talked about genetics. Another contributing factor is illness and health conditions and medications. So this may also be a reality for you. And this can be a difficult thing to deal with because there are some illnesses and medications that do impact your weight. And these are realities also. So I'm going to read over this list about some illnesses that can lead to weight gain. Hyperthyroidism, that's a reality for a lot of people. Their thyroids are off. That is not going to help. And that is not something you caused or are responsible for. It is something you can work with your primary care doctor or your endocrinologist to deal with for sure. But if you have that, that does contribute, right? That's something you can't influence. Cushing's syndrome. It's when the body produces too much cortisol. Too much cortisol is also produced by too much stress. And a lot of us have too much stress. So part of the entire program of weight loss should absolutely 100% in every program include stress reduction education. It doesn't usually. When you go to the doctor for a GLP-1, they don't give you a class in stress education. When you go to your primary care doctor, they don't give you a class on stress reduction methods. When you go for bariatric surgery, they don't give you a class. You need that information. You can get a lot of that information in this podcast and in the BariAftercare program. I do meditations every single week that you can use every single day, or go out on your own. Get an app. Do something to reduce your stress. Cortisol contributes to being overweight. And Cushing disease is a disease where your body produces too much of that. PCOS. God love every one of you who suffers from that because it is miserable. And it is miserable to try to lose weight with PCOS. So it's, that is one of those things. It's an endocrine disorder with women, can definitely lead to irregular periods, weight gain, and it makes it very difficult to lose weight. That is a legitimate factor that you're not using as an excuse. My issue with people are excuses. A lot of these things are not excuses. They are legitimate reasons related to weight. And I think this is what's frustrating for a lot of people who carry extra weight, because a lot of society doesn't understand that these conditions can make it really difficult to get rid of excess weight. A hypothalamic disorder, which affects part of the brain that controls appetite, can also lead to increased weight. Celiac disease, an autoimmune disease that can cause nutritional deficiencies and weight gain after starting a gluten-free diet. Some medications and some antidepressants, anti-seizure medications, diabetic medications, antipsychotic medications, and certain beta blockers can lead to weight gain. Now, that can be very individual, right? I take one of the most weight-gaining antidepressants known. I take Paxil. I may have gained a little bit of weight when I started taking it, but I was underweight because my anxiety was so high. I was not eating much. So I don't know if it was because of the medication or because my symptoms leveled out so I wasn't nauseous all the time and was able to eat. I also take a beta blocker. So, and it hasn't caused weight gain. But for some people, the reality is I've talked to people who have taken Depo-Provera shots and have gained ridiculous amounts of weight almost immediately. Other people, I've talked to one person who lost weight on Depo-Provera. I don't understand. All right, insomnia, something that's a problem for a lot of people. But getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night can cause the body to produce too much same old cortisol and insulin, which can lead to weight gain. And arthritis can lead to decreased activity and weight gain also. So there are also some health conditions that may lead to excess weight gain, obesity, or insulin resistance, which are Cushing's syndrome, PCOS, and underactive thyroid. So some of the medications, what they do is they interfere, they disrupt the brain's signal for hunger or other mechanisms. So definitely certain medications, and 20% of adults take medications that can cause weight gain. So this is something that you need to talk to your doctor about, see if there are other alternatives, you've got to do what you've got to do to manage your health conditions, and weight gain may be a side effect of that. And that's something you're going to have to talk to your doctor about. But that can be a reality for people. And, then they get judged for carrying weight, but the general public doesn't have an understanding or the compassion to understand that maybe these people have other conditions. Maybe these people are on medications that cause weight. So the things that you can't influence, please don't beat yourself up about those things. It's not something that you have influence over. Be compassionate with yourself and with others about those things. And I would also implore you, when you judge others for different things that you don't deal with, and I'm going to tell you right now, yes, you do. You judge other people just like you are judged by others. You may not judge them about their weight, but you may judge them about other things. So let's just keep our judging to a minimum and realize that just like other people don't understand what you're dealing with in terms of your weight, you don't understand what they're dealing with in terms of whatever else they got going on in life that you're judging them for. Just saying. All right, so there you go. That stuff, those are things that you may have some influence over in terms of talking to your doctor, whatever. But some of this stuff we need to take a reality check about. Now, if you have insomnia and it's a medical condition and you can't sleep, that's something you need to talk to your doctor with. But if your lifestyle choice is that I don't have time for sleep, I'll sleep later, that's a choice. That's a personal responsibility. There's enough evidence, and we know now that less than 6 hours of sleep causes susceptibility to weight gain. So you choose, friends. You choose. And I'll tell you something that I heard. I don't have any evidence about it, but I will, check into this because I think it's important. Younger people are sleeping more because the word is out. They have gotten the message that lack of sleep is not good for you in many ways. Not just weight, but it absolutely is related to your weight. And that's also because the increased cortisol and insulin, but also because if you're not sleeping, a lack of sleep can disrupt your hormones that regulate your appetite. And if you're doing crazy things like dieting and then you're hungrier at night, then you got that night eating thing, there are all kinds of things that go on. But that is something that you can make a choice about, is how much sleep you get. Now let's switch gears. We've talked about things you don't have much influence about: your genetics, medications sometimes, health conditions sometimes, sleep. Some of those things you can't influence. But now we're going to talk about, dog hair. We're going to talk about your culture and your environment. Now, food culture is the thing, right? How did you grow up? What were the dietary patterns in your house? What were portion sizes like? What was social eating like for your family? There are body image issues. How did your mother and grandmother and aunts feel about their bodies? Did they talk to you about your body? There's body image issues. There's this crazy social influence on that. There's the physical environment. Did you have access to food? What kinds of foods did your family eat? There's socioeconomic factors involved here. But you take a look at you. We are not comparing ourselves globally. I want you to think about you. And how you were fed as a child influences your choices, your preferences, your habits, your emotions around food, all of those things. So maybe you grew up in a family where, food was love. Great. That's not a horrible thing unless it's affecting your health, and unless it's affecting how you feel about yourself. And if it is, then you've got to make a change in your environment. If you're Hispanic, can you change your entire culture and how they eat? No. But can you change what you bring into your home? Yes. Does it mean you can't eat any of the ethnic foods that you were raised with? No. Does it mean you can limit and portion them? Yes. If you grew up in an Italian family and food was love, or an Irish family and my God, you ate nothing but potatoes, and everybody has their thing. We can all say, but in my family, food was love, and where I grew up, I hear it. No matter where people grew up or what family they grew up in, I hear it. That's what we did. That's what we did. That was our culture. True. I can't debate that. That's not something for me to argue with. You grew up how you grew up, and you learned what you learned. I grew up and learned to smoke and drink, and I learned that those were not going to be good to me, and I changed them. I put effort into changing those things because I didn't want them for my life. I didn't want the consequences that came with that. The consequences being alcoholism, the consequences being really miserable relationships, the consequences being children seeing their family members, put in jail and arrested and whatever else goes along with a lot of that lifestyle. My father was very functional, went to work every day, never got arrested, any of that. But I saw the impact, and I chose differently. So regardless of your culture, your heritage, your ethnicity, the environment that you were raised in, reality check. You can make changes. It doesn't mean you have to forego your culture or your ethnic foods or your traditions. It means you can make alterations if you choose to. Maybe you grew up on fast food. Doesn't mean you have to do so now. Is that what you want for your children? Is that what you want for your grandchildren? Is that leading you to the life you dream of living? If it is, you do what you want to do. You do what you want to do anyway. If you choose different consequences, that means making choices. That means putting effort into not eating out as frequently, not eating the high-calorie ethnic foods as often, not eating the portion sizes that we are used to. The biggest culprit of this, in my mind, and this is not factual, this is just what I see. If you look at the serving size of things like noodles and rice and pasta, all of which are fine to eat, they're small. And if you look at what is served at restaurants, it's ridiculous. That's a judgment. But it is ridiculous in terms of health. We don't need 6 servings of rice in one meal. It's not healthy. It is very unhealthy. We don't need a huge platter of pasta. We can have a portion size and be healthy. So it's altering. And this is where personal accountability comes in. This is not a societal problem. This is a you problem and a me problem. This is a personal accountability issue. So I can go to the restaurant and I can get the heaping serving of pasta, and I can eat a small portion of it, and I can bring it home and have 3 more healthy-sized meals from that. I can get the abundance of rice served at the restaurant. In fact, my husband and I, one of our favorite things is Japanese food. but it comes with all that rice. So we will bring it home and probably have 3 or 4 meals with a healthy portion of rice and lots of veggies and lots of protein. So this is where personal accountability comes in. It is not society's fault if you choose to eat 5 servings in one meal, because that is what you're served. That is your responsibility. So this is one area in which I really, really try to help people with, because culture and environment are things that you have 100% input into, and I'm going to say responsibility for. And I'm not saying anything about giving up any kinds of foods, am I? I'm not talking about falling into a horrible diet culture. I'm talking about reasonable, healthy portion sizes, as taught to you by your bariatric dietitian, not me. I'm not going to talk to you about micronutrients or macronutrients or what the actual portion size is, except as it relates to reading a label, which all of us can do, and see how much a portion size is and make the choice to have that much or expand it. That is a personal responsibility. So I would definitely talk with a bariatric dietitian about that information. Now, here's another factor that all of these, National Institute of Health, Center for Disease Control, say contributes to obesity. Personal health behaviors. Personal health behaviors are only one person's responsibility, and that is each of us. I'm responsible for mine, you're responsible for yours, my children are responsible for theirs, my husband is responsible for his. I am 100% responsible for my personal health choices. That means, do I go to the physician and get my annual mammogram and my women checks and my blood pressure checked and my heart checked and do all the things that you're supposed to do? That's 100% my responsibility. You have that option too. I understand many people don't have insurance. I understand that. If you have that option, it is your responsibility to take advantage of that option. I understand that many people do not. However, let's talk about other personal health behaviors, which is what you put into your body, which is what we just talked about. Sorry, society is not responsible for what you put into your body. You are. You are absolutely 100% responsible for that. How much sugar you intake, how much, of the healthy fat you put into your body and the unhealthy fat, how much fried food, how much protein, how many processed carbs, how much processed food, how much natural food, how much fruit, how much veggies, all of that. Only one person responsible for that if you're an adult. All right, physical activity factors. Again, there may be some things that limit you, such as, if a person is paralyzed or has horrible neuropathy, it's going to impact your ability to choose certain forms of physical activity. If you are morbidly obese, it's definitely going to impact your ability at this point in time. But as you lose weight, your options increase. You can do stretchy bands, you can lift water bottles. Whatever you can do is your responsibility to do. If you can do, then it's up to you to do within whatever constraints you have in your life. If you don't have any constraints, it's expensive to go to the gym. I don't go to a gym and I exercise 5 days a week, minimum. What do? I walk 3 miles. I do yoga. I do Pilates. I lift some weights. You do you. If you want to skip around the block, if you want to jump rope, if you want to go to a CrossFit class, if you want to go to a boot body class, if you want to swim, if you want to play pickleball, if you want to ride your bike, do it. But nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. And you need to be doing it, even if nobody's coming to do it with you. That is 100% your responsibility. Nobody is coming. So you're either going to get the help you need to stay consistent in it if you're having trouble staying consistent, get a bariatric coach. Find somebody to help you with your goals. If you know you have trouble maintaining consistency or getting up going, get somebody involved. Increase your accountability. Increase the people who will help you, but they're not responsible for you. Ultimately, you got to do it or you're not going to do it. You are responsible for your sleep hygiene. Things like, getting away from the blue light at an hour before you go to sleep, winding down, doing your schedule, your bedtime routine. Nobody else is responsible for that. I am going to go over some recommendations real quickly about recommended physical activity for different age groups. So I'll start with kids 6 to 17. It's recommended 1 hour or more of moderate to vigorous, intense physical activity daily. If you've got a kid, and they're younger especially, you're responsible for encouraging them to be involved. You're responsible to maybe get out there and go and walking with them. If you're letting your child spend 3, 5, 7 hours a day sitting around on electronics, that is on you as the adult. Now, as they get older, they are more individually responsible. Now, here's the deal. Here's for adults, age 18 to 64. At least 150 minutes of moderate intensity activities, such as brisk walking. 150 minutes. So I don't know how many, I'm not going to do that number because I'm not good at math. I know my weaknesses. 150 minutes of moderate intensity. So it's not even hardcore. We're not talking CrossFit. We're not talking burn boot camp. We're talking walking, riding your bike, stationary bike, rowing machine, treadmill. At least 2 days of activities that strengthen muscles. You can do Pilates, you can do yoga that strengthen muscles, you can lift weights, you can find other ways, but 2 days a week of activities that strengthen muscles. All right, so, here we go. 150 minutes, for example, 30 minutes, 5 days a week. There you go, of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity. So you can do 30 minutes, 5 days a week, or maybe you can do 60 minutes, 2.5 days a week, whatever works for you. But you've got to get your move on. Guess who's responsible for that? Society? No, not at all, not in the least. So when the World Health Organization says this is a societal issue, no, it's not. You don't have to pay for a gym. You can do exercise at home. There are all kinds of free YouTube videos. There are all kinds of things you can go outside and do that do not require paying membership anywhere. This is an individual issue. Stress management, also a you issue. If you choose to have, if you have a high stress life, which most of us do because of, that is a societal issue in a lot of ways. But a personal responsibility is making time to wind down. That's not society's responsibility to say, okay, we're not all going to take a siesta at 1 o'clock. Although what a great society that did implement that, right? That everybody kind of shuts down, slows down. What a great thing to do for your health. You're going to have to implement your own siestas. If it's 10 minutes in the morning of quietness and slow breathing and 10 again in the afternoon, nobody's coming. Do it or don't do it, but don't blame anybody else for your stress levels or the effort you put in to reduce those stress levels. We all have stress. People have stressful jobs. They got kids. They got parents they're taking care of. They got school. They got a combination of all of those things. Yes, life is stressful. How you choose to de-stress is on you. All right, then there are these psychological issues that can contribute to weight gain, emotional eating, high stress and cortisol levels, body image issues, low self-esteem, adverse childhood events, trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, being abandoned, being neglected, societal pressures, being bullied, being made fun of, being left out. These are a huge, huge deal. Huge deal. If you have issues that result from any of those things that I just said, they will impact your ability to sustain the behaviors that lead to improved health. You're going to be all gung-ho at the beginning, like maybe you were in past dieting events, but you're going to lose interest. If you don't deal with what's in your head and weighing you down in your heart, that has to do with how you feel about you. If you were bullied, if you were made fun of, if you were told you were no good, if you were not encouraged at home, if you experienced any kind of trauma or abuse, this likely impacts your ability to follow through with behaviors. Those things lead to depression and anxiety, and low self-esteem is a horrible, horrible thing. BariAftercare is all about working on your mental health. This podcast is all about teaching you about these things that influence your ability to stay focused, to continually put forth the effort so that you can get to a place where you're living the life you dream. So for your children, implement prevention. Implement prevention. Get them to a therapist if they're being picked on. Get yourself to a therapist if you're a critical parent, if you're constantly criticizing them like you probably do yourself. If you have negative self-talk, you've got to change that, and you've got to be a compassionate, encouraging, present, emotionally and physical parent if you want to prevent some of this for your kids. Where you are concerned, you are 100% responsible for getting whatever help you need, whether it be physical, nutritional, or psychological. And personally, I think a combination of all of the above is required. Here's the problem. People don't want to deal with their emotional issues. There's a beautiful article called Obesity, Problem, Solution, or Both, that really underscores and highlights the impact that adverse childhood events have on people's health, their weight, addiction issues, disordered eating, all of these things. People don't want to do that work. Do that work. What we're trying to do in our quest for improved health is look at the things you know to do that you aren't doing and say, how did I get here and why am I staying here? Because there are obstacles, which could be negative thinking, which could be low self-esteem, which could be health issues, which could be medication issues, whatever they are. What are the obstacles that you face that are between knowing what to do and doing those things? As you work through and eliminate those obstacles, you will move closer and closer to living the life you dream, because you will feel better about you and your life. And when we feel better about us and our life, we treat ourselves better, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And the better we feel about ourselves, the better we treat our bodies. That's what I have for today, friends. I hope this review of the causes of obesity and the things you do not have influence over and should be compassionate towards yourself about are, and those things over which you are responsible. So take responsibility like you do in so many other areas of your life, and do what you need to do to address those obstacles that stand in the way of consistent effort toward living the dream, living the life that you dream. All right, thanks for joining me. I will be with you next time. Bye-bye.